Different pictures or memes of the iceberg. There's a part above the surface and there's the depth below. Well, beginnings are part of what that core below the surface element is, right? It tells you why a person makes the decisions that they make. So you kind of have to think that in that part below the surface is your origin story or your operating system, right? It's programmed with all of the modules, the faults, everything about how you make decisions. So understanding these motivations about yourself and how you adapt your style to that approach really kind of leads you into how modern systems, modern business-day systems are built and how they work. Now, I'm not trying to push any kind of book or podcast. I don't want to post for you today. But I will keep three promises. Slides will be single concepts, right? I'm going to tell you about how I have translated my gaming skills into the business industry. And at the end, I will give you a runnable playbook for your next 30, 60, 90 days if you want to follow it. So let's get started with the first concept here. Great games are honest systems at their core. They give you inputs, feedback, and visible consequences to what you're seeing and interacting with. I'm sure everyone here has kind of heard or seen or practiced systems thinking, but the value of understanding the systems will help you hone how you translate your skills from gaming to leadership. Some of the early games I played, your Pitfalls, your Metroids, Combats, probably dating myself a little bit here, but a lot of these early games showed me that understanding the system is the key to beating the game, right? Patterns, learning how to do feedback, deaths were learning experiences, right? Or failures, right? Things that taught me to say, well, I gotta do better next time. Or I gotta find a new way of getting this done if I want to progress to the next level. Right? We've all had that one boss or puzzle that may have cost us an expensive controller of 3 or 5 or whatever, whatever your number is, right? But the key was learning to how to kind of adapt and react to these systems so I can find the right solution. We'll kind of dive a little bit more into the specifics of those systems, and we can translate these skills, but the things I want to really convey today is that understanding systems thinking is kind of a cheat guide for yourself to think about how do I translate my gaming skills to business. So let's talk about one of the great systems teachers, at least from my experience, D&D. Right? Everyone played D&D, everyone's gone through your camp. Yeah. So, one thing I tell people a lot is D&D is product leadership in disguise. All right? So, what got me into it, honestly, my brother and I went to a garage sale. He picked up his first edition book and a bag of weird-looking dice. Having grown up in the late 70s and 80s, board games were how you played with friends, but I was only used to a 6-sided dice. So I saw one with 20 sides. I was like, what is going on here? Right? But that was the thing I loved about the system itself, was that I got into character building. I started looking up stats, which characters were right for the next campaign, not just the characters I had built. Where are we going? Oh, we're going to the Underdark. We're going here. Oh, I need this skill set. So it really kind of got me into that world and understanding that a systems approach was kind of my ideal of beating those games or working with this. I loved it so much that I ambitiously tried to take on being a DM at a young age. I was about 11 when I first tried it. I was not, that was honestly just not ready. But the thing that I loved, or I learned from that was, you really have to be prepared, right? So planning was really important when you're doing a DM or you're trying to build an adventure for folks. I'm sure you've heard different variations of plans and planning, memes or sayings around it, but I would say your DM plan falls apart when someone pulls out a vorpal sword. That thing will ruin everything you've got planned. But as both a DM and a player, I learned that I had to have skills in facilitation and execution. Right? So some of the best DMs I've played with really understand the worlds that they create, right? And they set up a team to kind of shine and be a guide as well as a challenger in that system. The same is true in business today. If you're a leader or if you're part of a team, you really need to make sure you've planned your mission, you know where you're going, you read the room, make sure the players understand, or your team members understand where you're at. And then you have to keep the momentum going. Rules and boundaries prevent chaos, right? But your job as the DM or a player is to act as a whole and be a good servant or servant leader in that, right? So building up all these skills as a player, as a DM, kind of led me down to what is the thing I was really building? And it was discipline, right? So this isn't something you get overnight. It's really kind of steady habits that you do over time that build into your success or your determination. Every gamer that I know, or I see online, or people that I play with today, they spend a lot of time in practicing disciplines that help them with the game. So, like FPS players will play with aiming schemes, right? MMO players min-max the heck out of what they're doing, rotations, skills, gear, whatever it is. But if you think about what I just said, gamers are doing things outside of the game so they can play the game better. That's the discipline it takes to understand how you're going to do better in those worlds. But you need that same discipline inside of the business world. So building that up in my earlier life kind of let me kind of face the challenges in my later high school and through my military career. So again, when you show up to basic training, there's a lot of culture shock that was going on. But having the determination from the things I built up in my youth allowed me to get through that and through my high school, my advanced school. Luckily, when I joined, computers was a big thing for the Army, so I had to join and do computer programming for the Army, which opened up a whole new level of, hey, I can dive into this, I can do this, and I did operating system programming and board design, everything I could get my hands on in the early 90s to really foster my love of these systems, right? And that translated back to playing games and building computers, even in the 90s when there was gateways and Dells and all tons of things out there. I was still building my systems when it was actually here in Maryland. Timonium, that I don't know if they still do it anymore, but there's a big expo where people would go up and you buy motherboards and CPUs and all kinds of things. And every chance I got, I did that. So having good discipline skills kind of allowed me to succeed, both in my career and in my gaming career. And I do consider what I have done in gaming as kind of a career, at least it feels like. All right, so now we're going to start to work through the translations today. We're going to get into the kind of the meat of the conversation here. So modern organizations today are essentially live systems, all right? Everyone's probably, if you're working in corporate America or you're working through, even through, gaming development systems, they have a live aspect of them you have to adapt to every day. So I want everyone to really quickly think about what is one gaming instinct that you already use at work? What is one skill you think you already use every day?
This sounds so broad, but empathy. Teamwork.
Absolutely. That's a really good one. Right. So you really kind of have to take the idea that you're like, wow, I do that there and I do that there, right? So you want to make sure that, what you're looking at is translating those ideals from how you're interacting in games to what does it mean in business. And I do say translate, right? So I want to make sure, we'll talk about the translation aspect today. But one of the things, I think, for me that really kind of opened my eyes to that, or the understanding that I'm seeing similarities, were MMOs, right? So, massive multiplayer games are actually more like modern businesses than most people will understand the whole thing. The reason I call them organizational labs is because they kind of exert all the different things you would see in corporate America in both kind of micro and macro levels, right? So a lot of these games today, they have their top-end challenges, right? The things where only like about 5% of the players go and do the race to world first, right? And those are, kind of in all kinds of different games. A lot of times what we see if we're watching streams or YouTubes or videos about those things is we're watching the gameplay. We're not seeing what's going on behind the scenes. And it's actually quite a bit like what you do every day at your job, right? So organizational design, capacity, milestones, decision rights, incidents. All of these are present, you just don't get to notice them because you're focused on what the gamers are doing and playing, but realizing all of that operational stuff is going on behind the scenes, right? So I've spent time as a raid leader in various games, WoW, Rift, Terra, Final Fantasy. That was the one thing I noticed early on was that as I was running and leading these raids, I had to do prep time. I had to make sure people had the right material. I had to make sure people were there on time and ready to go. So the value that taught me about translation of this is, if I'm becoming a team leader, as I was becoming a team leader at the time, everything I was seeing there was really translating like, well, I gotta get the project control, I gotta get all the requirements done, I've gotta get these pieces in place if we want the project to be successful. So here's another kind of thinking exercise for everyone to write down, or you can kind of think to yourself. Think about your team today, if you work with one, what roles are missing? How could filling those roles help with your project or what you're working on? So we'll get into team design a little bit, but I want to kind of come back to what I was saying just a moment ago about the principles of translation. And that is, we translate, we don't cosplay. You want to use metaphors or things you've built up in your gaming as a way to translate these without dressing them up as the same, right? Again, not all of your gaming skills are going to be direct one-to-one translations, right? But the value of your experience in these worlds is understanding you have built certain disciplines, certain skills. How can they help your daily life? What can they do for you guys, right? So the concepts we're going to walk through today are going to help you understand kind of why I had this statement up there. If you're, I've seen people try and say, well, I'm going to do this here, I'm going to do that exactly later. I'll say from experience, that's not going to work. You do actually have to look at what is the experience or what is the skill you're focused on. Now how do you translate that back to your team, your organization, or however you're working today. The one thing I want to add to this particular topic is do not be afraid of failing, even as you're doing translations, right? So what's the difference between a master and an apprentice?
How many times they've failed?
How many times they've failed?
Investiture, in other words.
Right? So that failure has taught them so much about what they're trying to achieve, the things that worked right, things that didn't work right, and how to progress, right? I think Thomas Edison once said, I didn't find one way to make a light bulb, I found 99 ways to how to not make a light, right? So we have to take that into mind. So let's get started with our methods. In most games today, you have kind of the holy trinity, right? Your DPS, your tanks, your healers, right? Some games try to break that norm. I don't know that they're that successful, but I did try them. I think it was I forget which one, Guild Wars.
Yes.
Try to break that, break that norm. But each of these roles really has a function, a purpose, and a design. So they have their mechanics to deal with. They have their responsibilities, right? But teams in the business world are built kind of in the same manner. So think about the team you work with, or that you lead, if you're a leader of a team. And start thinking about, well, who's the tank on the team? Who's the healer? Who's the support? Who's our advantage, right? It's kind of hard to not, start to, one of us might be like, well, that guy really steps up and does a lot. So he's kind of the shield of the team, right? But you have to kind of, look at, you want those clear responsibilities and roles set up within your teams. Now, one thing I'll advocate is that if you don't have clear roles and responsibilities in your teams, there is, I always impress on my team, it's everyone's responsibility to get that. You do not want to miss the chance for having a clear setup of, this is our responsibility, this is your job, this is your job, this is your job. That doesn't mean you can't help each other, but having that clarity makes sure the team is going to function well, right? So kind of picture a scenario here. You're in the race to roll first for a game. You're in the middle of a poll, right? And your competitor's right on your heels, right? They're just nipping at your heels to get ahead of you. And you're saying, all right, we're doing well. Oh, there's a mechanic. The person that's supposed to handle that mechanic isn't moving or is not handling. What do? You make this happen. So you go meet it, right? You go take the mechanic to make sure the team can move forward, right? It's the same thing in a business world. If you do not have that clarity, everybody should take the responsibility to make sure it is there. I always say, if leaders aren't willing to kind of help you on that, you need to get the team behind you so you can all tell them this is something we want. All right. So as we kind of work through the translation, we're going to go into the next name, which is kind of composition's best friend, which is capacity. So I think a lot of you will understand the statement I'm about to make. If you don't, it's going to be sorry. Don't blow all your cooldowns on trash, right? People love to, spike the damage meters or show things that help. But this is where you have to think about, what are my cooldowns and where should I use them? In the business world, this translates to your senior resources, all right? The people that have the experience know what they're doing. This is where you kind of look around the room and you say, all right, we're about to run into a problem. I need to use a coolddown. In the business world, that is, I need to find a senior person that can handle this. So you use those people where it moves outcomes, right? Not just, I can tackle this one thing, but where it makes the difference, right? So you kind of have to think, as a thinking exercise for the team, where is one place, say, last week or in the upcoming weeks, where to not use one of those, right? Or where one has been misused, right? So we put somebody on that, but it was overkill, we didn't need that, right? And we missed an opportunity over here. Right, same thing in cooldowns, like, we blew 2, tank buster cooldowns, didn't need it, now we're screwed for the next phase, right? So you have to think about your people in the same aspect, right? The best thing I can typically say is your senior folks know their capabilities, they know what they can do, leverage them, listen to them, right? To find out where, you as a leader or you as a team member, where can you use them the best? So what are the things we have to accommodate your cooldowns or our cooldowns used for? Boss bases, right? Or boss mechanics, right? These become your milestones kind of in the business world. You have to think like every part of your project, there's a transitional phase. So most teams don't typically wipe at the beginning, they wipe at the transition, they wipe at a mechanic spot. It's the same thing for a project team in the business world. You're not going to find often that teams start bad or they have some trip up. It's when they hit the first spot in their milestone, whatever it is, sprint, program increment, delivery, those are the places you're going to find where your team is going to start to trip up. And that is where planning plays such a critical role when you understand those transitions and you understand how to use your folks and you set that up. All right, so another thinking exercise for everyone today. For the next few seconds, think about what is it that wipes out your team. You can be gaming or business. What are the things that cause your team to just run into a wall?
Communication breakdowns.
That one? Any other ones?
Again, general, but roadblocks, especially technical roadblocks that you did not see coming, and make space for it.
And that's a great one.
Tunnel visioning?
Tunnel visioning. Yeah, absolutely. That one will be, that one's like, it's great for focus, but if you stop to take a look around, you're going to run into you're definitely going to run into a problem. So yeah, so you think, scope creep, decision latency, communication problems, all of these things are going to be the reason why one of these transitions doesn't go well in the team. Now also think about this. What was a signal that you saw that you were getting ready to have this problem? What was the one thing you can kind of point at and say, ooh, yeah, that really led to that? Kind of one's another one of those good ones. Like, did someone get their person to look up for a hot second? Make sure they're paying attention.
Yeah, I was about to say, totally often leads to, technical difficulties you didn't oversee because, your CFO is actually spending all their time making features and they don't get to actually step back and be like, 2 weeks from now.
Exactly. So how do we guard against these kind of challenges, right? Well, this is the same thing you do when you're actually planning out a boss fight, right? You know where your milestones are. What are the transition things? What are the mechanics? What are the things we know? This is going to cause us to have to start over again, right? The one thing I love doing with my teams is not always talking about what happens when it goes well, what happens when it hits the fan. And everybody should be prepared to understand what happens when when it hits the fan. It's not to scare them, it is to get them prepared to know that while we're in the middle of this, things will change. Not may, things will change. Alright? Alright. So one of the things you see in like games is, people are saying, hey, it's time to pull the boss. But who decides it? Right? Who makes the call to start the encounter? So this is where I say decision rights is a big aspect of how your team is configured. So you kind of have to think about this. Clarity will always beat consensus when timing is important. Like by my nature, I'm a very consensus leader, right? But I also recognize that there is a timing element. If I have a clear action and the team knows what we're doing, I make the call. And there's no need for worrying about the consensus aspect. You're the leader, make the call, do the work. So just like you do in game encounters with your business life, you have to figure out who's got the right to start the pool. So think about it like, who's going to pull a story off the board? Who's going to pull that task into our current sprint? Right? Who pauses it? Right? Oh, we've got a problem. This one's not well done. We need to actually probably punch it, or we need to figure out what we're going to do with it later. And then who calls the light? It's not working. We need to put it back because it's missing some things. It's missing definitions, criteria, whatever it is. Right? Now, in most teams that I build, I actually like having everybody to have these rights, to make sure they understand anybody can call these things. But that's where, again, we go back to say, rules prevents chaos, right? Rules and boundaries help. So you have to establish that when you're doing things like, all right, we're going to set this up, and we're going to work through these pieces. Oh, and anyone can call it, but you now have to have this criteria and timing, right? Because if you're on the last day of your development iteration, typically probably not a good time for a late call, unless you really are going to split the floor, right? So what do? Then you say, all right, we're going to wipe. It's inevitable. How do you recover, right? You have to treat each of these things in the business world like a boss fight, just like an incident, right? So I remember being in a highly drama guild at one point, and our guild leader came over the Ventrilo at the time, was in Discord yet, and said, guys, wipes are data, drama is optional. And that really kind of hit home for me to say, okay, failure is about learning. Not necessarily, we can have a problem, we know what we missed. But the value is learning that as a leader or as a team member, you should want to establish a blameless system. When I'm running, big teams, or I'm running like mission critical systems today, and we have one of these, the first thing I don't do is figure out who did it. The first thing I do is, it's time to fix it. We'll get through the fixing, all right? Once we get through the fixing, then we'll do a retrospect. And we'll figure out where the team can do better. Because even though there is typically a person or persons involved, I don't want the teams or other people on the team feeling like it is a blame machine. You don't get anything from that, you just end up with very disillusioned and disheartened people on your team. So I really focus on making what is a safe space to be wrong. So each person has their responsibilities on the team, and that comes with the accountability for it. That they understand that I'm supposed to do this, but I am part of a whole, right? The worst thing you can kind of let foster in any team is that mistakes will cost someone their job. And I'll say this from experience, even in the most dire of circumstances, I have never let anybody go because of 1, 2, 3 mistakes. So long as I can see that person is taking accountability, working to get better, and being a good member of the team, all is one there. Okay. I don't want failure, I want people to learn, but you also have to set up those systems that lets your wipes become data on how to get better. All right, so what's the fun part when it comes to boss fights? Mood, right? That's part of the whole thing. Somebody's going to get something, or hopefully you've got the different systems set up for that. So recognition and recognizing good team behavior is what you will, is going to shape what you see more from your team. Understanding how to reward them, right? Not sure if any of you had to work with like a DKP system or if you've heard those. You know, I kind of trigger myself when I say that. I've got some horrible stories from using those systems. But again, what did I learn? It's a system that taught me that if you want to have a great team and you want to have a good experience, these systems keep you from having drama that is unnecessary, right? So as leaders or members of the team, you need to actually ask or figure out what is the recognition criteria that lets you get bonuses, promotions, whatever it is. And I actually challenge you all to think about when you can go and ask from your leadership or when you can establish if you're the leader of the team this next week. It's important that your team understands how recognition works and that it is as transparent as you can make it so they do not run into problems like, well, maybe if I just work an extra 10 hours, that'll give me a promotion. That's typically not. Right? So make sure you're clear. If you don't have that clarity, ask for it. Right? Funny enough, I've had people come to me and say, well, I want your job. I actually love that question. As a leader, I'm never afraid of being replaced because I know it's my responsibility to build the next generation of leaders. Right? One of the things I would say to my boss is, hey, I'm going to do your job so you can go do your job. Right? Because a lot of times what your boss, your supervisor is looking for is for you to do your job plus a little bit of theirs so they know how to do their job even better. Right? And it works all the way up through the chain. It actually ends up, I don't know how many times I've spent, like, hey, you're doing that, I'm going to take that off your plate, you can go do something else, and then move on. Right? So now, what are the easiest ways that you want to establish new rules? We start at the beginning. Your guild charters or your working agreements, right? Your team working agreements. Teams always run better with posted norms. Right? So working agreements are kind of really the backbone of a good team that can accomplish mission, be part of an organization, and it sets clear expectations for everyone that's involved with the team. You want to make sure that, it lets you define things like your cadences, your ceremonies, anything that you're really kind of functionally wanting your team to behave like, you can set up through here. Now the good key or a good key element of a working agreement is brevity. I think William Shakespeare said in Hamlet, brevity is the soul of the wit. And I always I found that to be true because the simpler things are, the easier they're understood. I would say that, I love saying that a good example of this is many years ago, working for a great mentor boss, and we were writing our yearly reviews. And I think I sent him a small War and Peace novel, in my review. And he came into me and he says, all right, hey, do you see that key on your keyboard? I said, yeah, it's pointing at the page down key. He's like, yeah, that doesn't work. I don't use that key. So he taught me that, okay, make my reviews as just a tad more shorter. But the value is simplicity helps clarity every day of the week. And for your team, especially if you're onboarding new players to the guild, new team members. The easier this is to understand, the faster they're going to be a part of that team. Again, if you don't have one of these, if your team does not have something you can point at, I encourage everyone to go get it. Even if you're just a member of the team, kind of, make your leadership understand, we need this so everyone knows how to work better. Right? So all of the things we've kind of talked about today, these translations so far, really support, what is the main event? Raid time. Right? So raid time in the real world is really steady. You've practiced, you've done everything you can, you've got your equipment ready, now you're ready to go and say, yep, we're going to tackle this challenge. The same thing happens when you're releasing software. You have to prep, you have to know what you're getting ready to do, you have to know who's doing what roles, what happens, wipes, recovery, rollbacks, all of these things are the same thing as planning when you're doing a raid. So you have to agree to when is it going to happen, right? What time is everybody going to show up? In large 20 or large number of team kind of projects or your raids, you're going to find nobody, there's no perfect time, right? Somebody always has to accommodate. But that's the value I give you back to your working agreements. You want to make sure you have that in stone so you understand, all right, this is what we do, everyone agreed to it, now everyone can accommodate at the time, right? So one of the things I've kind of always established when I'm doing releases, I don't do it as much in games because sometimes it's hard to get games to do this, but when you're doing a release, the one thing I always like to do is an after-action review, right, or a retrospective, kind of being like a small, and it doesn't have to be complex, right? It's just something like, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do better next time? 5 minutes, that's all you need. The value, even for boss kills, is understanding, all right, we know we're going to be back here, what do we need to tweak, what do we need to fix, right? That's the value of having that discipline of doing those things and making it part of your working agreements and how your teams operate. Well, I'll get into a little bit more of why certain means are important here in a little bit. Now, once you've got kind of all of these different translations understood, you're thinking about all the different ways you can translate your skills. The one thing I like to teach people from some of my earlier military days is what they call an OODA, OODA. So it's observe, orient, decide, act. In a lot of cases I've seen the speed of orienting your people will overcome the speed of them acting. And that means you have to be thoughtful about, towards an error, right? Planning will overcome speed if it's done correctly. So all of the kind of information that we've talked about, so far, and I think it was, I think Will said it in the keynote, was you need the ability to look wide. I think he said widen your field of view. But I add one thing to that. Look wide, act small. Big changes, unless they're really needed, can cause more harm than you think. I think a lot of teams chase things like innovation. Like, hey, we're going to go take on a challenge, or I want to produce the next killer feature for our app. And I'll generally orient my teams to say, little innovation, everyday things you do, will actually add up to larger innovation over time. And it's just about, oh yeah, I optimized this function. Great. Well, everything calls that function. So guess what? The entire system just sped up, right? So you have to kind of, be mindful that it's great to kind of put on the big, hey, we're going to do the great thing, but you also want to keep your team focused on little innovation. Everyday actions out of far more than just big bang things you take on. So this loop is something you can use. It's built into any, your major systems. You see this in, Agile. You see it in, PM work. You see it in all of the different modern processes today. The value for you all is, making sure you take your gaming skills, right, as you're translating everything we've talked about and saying, well, I can use my skills, but I can take that and translate to the business world in the same action. Observe, orient, decide, and act, right? So I talked earlier about doing AARs, after-action reviews, retrospectives. What do you want to do? There's, 1,000 names for this, right? But if you kind of think about these are the levers of change, and you kind of go back to the old Archimedes thing, right? Find me a lever long enough, and I'll move the world. These are the levers, right? You haven't really had a chance to go through one of these, I recommend you kind of start to introduce that concept to your team. This is the vehicle that makes lasting change, right? And then, as a leader, I've found you don't necessarily need to say, oh, it's always the leader that's going to make the change. The team is going to make the change, right? Your job as a leader is to help reinforce that with the things they're learning and make sure you're holding them to account and giving them the space. Leaders don't belong in that perspective, and I always love to have that conversation with them saying, you're looking for change, but you're not putting the means to do it inside that conversation. You have to think about what makes lasting change, understanding what happened, learning from it, documenting it, and making it part of your ingredient for your team. Right? I think someone said earlier, communication is one of the keys that keep good teams thriving together. Right? I've said this a few times, but I kind of wanted to spend a moment here to talk about clarity. Right? Making sure you really understand what are the goals, what are you trying to accomplish with your team, team, your project, your grade, whatever it is you're working on, right? So I'm sure we've all had different teams. You got one member of the team, looks like they're constantly just not getting it. They're always missing the mechanic, they're missing their deadlines. The value for you as another team member or a leader is really finding a space to say, what's going on? Are they actually bad, or are they just missing something? Are they too afraid to ask what's going on? Again, that's that safe space where, again, you have to create the moment where it's okay to be wrong. You don't want people being afraid of asking these questions. All right? And that will create a problem in your culture of those that ask questions get silent. Again, definitely another one. I'll say it this way. I have put whole plans up on board based on something I thought was going to work. And I had a guy that had just been out of college 6 months ago. Yeah, what about this, this, and this? And I was like, all of that is dead. Like the whole thing is shot. But that's the value.
To see it.
Right? It's the value, right?
Yeah.
You have to listen to all voices. And the clarity of what you're doing helps reduce that latency in decision making, right? So, kind of as you're thinking about translating your skills, you start to have to think about, all right, well now I'm not doing just a 5-person endeavor, or I'm doing a 20-person, or I'm managing multiple teams. So what changes as you scale up? Ultimately, all of these skills we've talked about today are the same at scale. The difference is you as a leader now have to get people acting like you. When I said earlier, you do my boss's job, it's the same thing. You need to train your senior people, your squad leaders, your managers, how to use skills like these that help the team benefit, right? You've already been exuding and you've already been exhibiting those things. So now it's your job to move that on to the next folks. And you teach them about things like decision rates, working agreements, things that make these teams successful, right? For me, as it's like one of the first chances when I got promoted from being a team manager to a director, I went from running one team to 14 in a day. But what did I change? All I changed was I took all the skills I was giving to my team at my level, and I started training my managers with those skills. Ultimately, was it harder? Absolutely. There's a lot more to watch. Was it rewarding? I love it. That was one of the things I really liked about my career and how I translated my skills. That all of these things help me understand what works at your micro level, what works at your macro level. And they're not so different. Safe spaces, good communications, not being afraid of failure, and help you quite a bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the big pitfalls to kind of avoid as you're doing, translations or as we're looking at the different skills here. I'm going to mention 3 things that are a little more specific, but they translate from your gaming life to your business life pretty well. So I'll say DPS heroics. Right? People that just love to charge in, or Leroy Jenkins, I guess, if you'll, you kind of, moments. I'll say it, kind of away from the business aspect. I'll take a team of B players every day of the week and on Sunday twice. I like rock stars if they play well on the team. All right? One thing I always say is I don't suffer horrible human beings. And unfortunately, I've experienced that about twice in my life. Where I kept somebody on the team because they were great. They made a lot of stuff work. They had some great output. One of my last examples and kind of what solidified this for me was I had a person on the team, great player, but he made everyone miserable. But I kind of ignored it because he was good at his job, right? Was getting the work out. He eventually crossed the line. I had to remove him from the team. It just wasn't even a moment where I could say, nope, you've done it. You caused the problem. But the thing that kind of shocked me was the next sprint after that person left, the team's velocity doubled in one small sprint. And why? Because they didn't have the toxic person in the room overriding everybody else's voice. All right? So be careful when you see those folks. Again, they're great if they fit within the team dynamic. If they don't, find a spot for them where they can be on their own, or they just don't need to be part of the team.
Yeah, it's another form of safety.
Right. Ambiguous ownership. kind of allows everyone to play the blame game, right? So this is where you can set up things like racy charts, you can set up who is accountable, who's responsible. It's a great tool. You know, I could probably do a whole other talk on that. I think, you know, it's one of those things that you can really kind of dive into when you're talking about your guild charters and your working assignment, your working agreements. But the value of these are getting everyone to understand what their role is, what they're accountable to, right? And how do they work together. So you don't end up in a position where it's like, well, so-and-so's, well, so-and-so. That's not the point. The point is fix the problem, move on, figure it out as a team. The last thing I'll say is kind of a pet peeve of mine and a pitfall to avoid is skipping your ceremonies. What I mean by ceremonies, your retrospectives, your plannings, anything that takes away from how the team operates. You want to be focused on what are the good parts of those, right? And you can minimize them. I'm not saying you have to plan for 4 days, right? Or spend 5 hours in a retro. The value of those ceremonies is you're learning and you're adjusting. When I've had teams come to me and say, well, we're going to skip our retro for the sprint, my first question is, who made that call, right? And people kind of learn, as they get to know me, and they're like, oh, we don't skip those things. Mostly because, look, they made a bad call, they picked up a story that was too big, or they didn't realize how big it was. But again, no one called the white. So I go back to helping them with decision rights, make sure they understand, we probably should have put that one back on the heat, right? Make sure you understand those things as you're kind of working through how these ceremonies used, what the value is to the team. Because if you start skipping enough of those, then you're going to regress. And this team's going to slide backward because they're not learning anything. They're more focused on doing the work and learning from where they're not doing the work right, or they're doing it inefficiently. All right, so the fun parts. So what changes for everyone on Monday? And so let's think about the next kind of 30, 60, 90-day opportunities that I can help you all with. So the next 30 days, you guys are going to listen, learn, and map. Right? Think about all the different things that you can see, you can hear, and understand this is the thing that's going well for us. This is the thing that is not going well for us. You can even introduce it as concepts to the team in a planning session. Hey guys, what's our boss mechanic this sprint? Simple question, right? Get everybody involved in that conversation. But the idea is to listen during this time frame so you can kind of build out what comes next from like 60 to 90 days. This is where you start to align everybody on what does the definition of success look like for the team. That could mean altering the working group. It could mean altering your, how people are, assigned, or what roles they have, right? At 90 days and beyond, you're in execution mode. And then once you're kind of in execution mode, your primary job is to start to simplify things, right? You're going to build up a little bit of complexity and you're kind of getting things going. And the value is starting to figure out how to do it better at a more optimal level in that kind of time frame moving forward. Right? I would also encourage everyone to kind of write down your plans. If you're going to build a 30, 60, 90, or however you want to kind of iterate that out, writing it down actually will increase the likelihood of you doing the work by 42%. Now that may sound like a very made-up statistic, right? 80% of all statistics are made up on the spot. It's actually a study from Dr. Gail Matthews at Dominican University in California where they found that actually tangibly writing down your goals more likely will get you to do them than those that just thought about it. This is proven out through science and psych science out there today. So it's important you guys think about your roles and how you want your teams or how you want them to work through these different systems. As we kind of close out here, I will say, playing games throughout my career have taught me the systems that really shaped how I have learned and led. It's given me a purpose to kind of find my niche between those two worlds and how they help each other. Not detriments, not, oh, you're a gamer, you don't know anything. It's how do I translate that to make my life more successful in both aspects. And then connecting with people really is the best way to keep yourself kind of humble and honest. Right? You guys kind of take anything away from today's talk, I hope it's one of these things, right? You have skills from your time as gamers, right? And I don't want you to lose sight of the idea that they're just useful in one aspect of your life. they actually are very good for translating to how you operate in your job every day. If you're going to become a leader, I would ask that you invest in servant leadership. It's the best way, at least from my perspective, to lead teams. It keeps everyone invested, and it takes on the right role for the team to be successful.
Try to invest in servant leadership?
Servant leadership.
Servant leadership.
Yeah, servant leadership, yes. Lastly, okay, just make sure you're connecting with the people. And again, going back to the, don't suffer, bad human beings, try and be a good human being yourself. We kind of close up. I want to thank the staff here today, Gaming Future, for allowing me to come in and share this with you all. We have some swag up here. If everybody wants to come and grab a coffee mug or these are crab mallets.
Because I really use that.
I say they're crab mallets. I don't want them weaponized, for the conference here.
They'll be used on their intended target.
Okay, all right. So thank you all for coming, and I really appreciate your time.
Any questions or?
Any questions? Anything you want.
So this is sort of hyper-specific to me, and I might pull you aside and have a whole conversation later. But so I'm the CEO of my company. We're very, very small. We're Guilty Games. I wear a lot of hats, and a bunch of us wear a lot of hats. And we're in my business partner and I realized like a week ago that we hit our 1 year of like meeting each other and starting to establish this. The company itself isn't quite at 1 year, but we were like, oh my gosh, it's been a year. So we're right at the beginning, especially when it comes to game development. And I feel that growth on the horizon, for us, where I know we're going to grow as a team, but right now we're small and we're very well connected and we have very clear roles and we're jamming, right? And I'm looking ahead at the future at that inevitable growth. And one thing I fear with that, especially on such a small interconnected team, is sort of siloing happening as we grow out. Do you have any, I know it's kind of a broad question, but do you have any advice on that as sort of teams grow and stop being, this 5-8 person operation thing to being 30 people, 50 people, more? How do you keep that secondary leadership and primary leadership as well connected or a simulacrum of as well connected as they were when you were just 8 people working on a couple of projects?
Okay, this is where you have to invest in things like, you can build working agreements at all levels.
Yeah.
Right? You can always say, hey, we're going to have things like Scrum Squares, or we're going to have the regular things that allow us to keep those walls as translucent as possible.
Yeah.
People are going to build walls.
It's impossible. Yeah.
But the value is saying, well, what are they doing over there? Well, I can see.
Yeah.
I can see what they're doing. Are we about to make a mistake, right? And that's the other thing is creating the culture for your leaders and for your team members to talk to each other as much as you can. Communication always helps, right?
Yeah.
Clarity
always helps.
Clarity is a key. Making sure.
Servant leadership also very, very much helps.
Ways you can also do that. It's like, for big teams. Like when I had 14 teams, what did we do? We planned it. I hauled everyone into a big room. We were there all day.
Yeah.
Stickies and stuff all over the place. You know what we did today? We started drawing red strings between the problems. Look at things that's like, if we do that, we're about to cause this issue. That's where you say you pick up these practices that help you understand the interconnectivity. And again, as long as people understand that, generally you're not going to run into too many problems.
Yeah.
But if people are hiding things or
hardening up,
right? You're not processing. That's when you need to talk to those people and say, what's going on?
Yeah.
Because
where's this breakdown? We're not pointing fingers, but where did this break down?
Blameless systems.
Yeah.
You've got to keep those in place because they really help you with making sure your people feel like, I can go to the CEO and say, man, this just ain't working.
Well, because it's also about admitting, because you're not going to get to the heart of what actually happened if people are scared for their jobs a lot of the time. People aren't going to say, like, I messed that up, or I think I tried to handle it this way, did not go the way I expected. We might want to try something else, or I'm not the guy to be the client-facing person for this, and this, because they won't do that.
And I reward people to do that.
Yeah. Yes.
If someone comes to me and says, man, I just messed up, right? I mean, one of the more famous ones I remember, I was working with the State Department doing password issuance. Old systems, Windows NT 4.0, and my build manager, when he did the build of our software we were selling, he packaged the kernel from the system he was on into the deploy. So when I installed that thing, that's certainly dead. I didn't care. I figured out what the problem was. I called him. No, I didn't have to wake him up, in the middle of the night, right? But we called him. We figured it out. Found the CD. We took care of the problem.
Yeah.
Right? Don't, the value of getting people to understand that it's not about the mistake. It's about the recovery. Judge the recovery, not the mistake. That's the value. Because the mistakes are going to happen. They're always there. Right? How people recover is more important. And that's where you can also find out which of your team members truly are part of the team, or those that are like, well, whatever, it was so-and-so's fault, or like, those, they just start to self-identify right away. It's like, okay, maybe not that person. Any other questions?
I'm a plant. We're colleagues, but this is a real question. We actually learning from each other, and I'm learning a lot about Ken right now. I think of like Ender's Game and like the way that you can almost like, and I'm not like a gamer, so my son is better equipped to ask these types of questions, but I think of like the hack of him not knowing what he was doing. I'm not going to spoil anything probably for anyone here, but can you kind of flip a switch to get the fun aspect? There's fundamentally something different about doing the gaming, and that this is something that you choose to do versus, especially in this region, in this day and age, that it's, the thing that you're getting paid to do, all this translation might require some kind of willful self-illusion to be able to really be that same gamer person in a work environment, to forgive yourself, to forgive others the same way that you would in fiction.
I would say work is pragmatic, not punishment. Right? If you're going to align yourself to being somewhere more than you spend time with your family, right? When you think about that, a lot of times you're at work more than you spend time with your family. Your job, think about it like a DM. GM's job is to make it fun and focused, but it keeps it fun in the aspect, right? One of the things that I famously do, probably too much, but I crack jokes every meeting. Everybody should have a smile at least one time in the meeting. You're right. So I would say work is not about feeling like you're in this punishing environment. It should be fun. It should be collaborative. If you love what you do, there's no reason not to show it. Right? Keep it. Make sure you don't have to go to HR because of the fun you're having. That's all I say. Right? It'll make them make a policy for the country. But yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.